JSPs are Java server pages. Basically, they are inside-out servlets. What we mean by that is that in a servlet, we were writing Java code and putting HTML inside of that to emit it to the client. In a JSP, we're writing HTML code first and putting Java code inside of that using special tags. So we're writing tags instead of Java, so it could just be regular HTML tags, or it could be JSP tags, and we'll look at a couple examples of those in the next slide. What's happening is that the container is translating the JSP that we wrote to an actual servlet. So much of what we've already learned about how servlets work applies to JSPs because JSPs really are servlets. So here's an example of a JSP. Basically what this is doing is it's setting a counter and displaying to the user how many people have been there before. So there's a few different tags in here. There's some plain old HTML tags that just get printed out as normal, but you'll notice that there's the angle bracket %, and a few variations of these. So let's look at this. So the first kind of tag we're going to talk about is a scriptlet, and basically this just contains Java code. It needs to end in a semicolon, and it starts and ends with angle bracket %, and then % angle bracket. So you can put any Java code in here. You might just have a one-word statement like this, visitor counter ++, and that'll increment the visitor counter as you would expect. You can have a block of Java code in there, in which case this scriptlets can be multi-line. Next, we'll look at an expression. So as opposed to a scriptlet, an expression just prints out a value. So this becomes the argument to out.println, you could imagine. And we'll look at how this gets translated later. But this differs in that there's an equal sign after the %. So angle bracket % equals, and then it just ends in % angle bracket. There's also no semicolon here because, again, this gets put in as the argument to out.println, so we wouldn't want a semicolon inside of the parentheses, the parameters. Another tag type is a declaration, so this can declare a variable or function for us. And declarations differ in that they go to the top of the servlet, outside of the service method. So we wouldn't want to, inside of our service method, declare a variable over and over and set it to 0, because then we wouldn't be able to count. So this gives us a way to, outside of our service method, declare variables or functions that we're going to be using. So this has angle bracket %bang, exclamation point, and then any Java declaration variables or functions. We also have JSP comments, and this starts and ends with 2 dashes. And this will not be sent out to the client as opposed to HTML comments, which would be sent out to the client. There's a few other JSP tags that we have. Directives have an @ sign, and these basically talk about how the page is going to be rendered or handled in general. So some of our import statements will be in here if we need to use ArrayList or other things or packages that we've written. We might import CT390. In this case, we're just importing Java util star, and that'll dictate how the JSP gets translated to a servlet, what import statements will happen to the top. We'll get to tag libs in the next unit. There's also some other types that we'll get to in the next unit, but we'll highlight them here. JSP action. It looks more like an HTML tag, but it has a prefix, and we'll cover that in the next unit. So the lifecycle of a JSP. The JSP is deployed with a web app. It's not compiled by the developer. It's not translated by the developer or Eclipse. It's actually in the web app in its raw source format, in the WAR file in its raw source format. The container translates it to a servlet. In the next slide, we'll look at what the translation looks like. But once it's been translated to a servlet, the rest of the servlet lifecycle applies. The class is loaded, it's initialized, the service method is called repeatedly, and then it's destroyed. There's slightly different methods being called, so it's JSP init instead of just regular init init, and then there's JSP service that's being called repeatedly. Notice that we don't have a do get and a do post. So if you do a get or a post for a JSP, you're going to get the JSP. There's not a differentiation. So whereas in a servlet we could choose which methods we wanted to handle, all of the methods are funneled into the JSP service method in this case. So on the left we have the JSP file, and on the right we have a basic version of how this might get translated. There's a lot more gory details, but we're leaving those out. If you want, you can look at the book on page 297 for those, for how it actually gets translated. But here's what a basic JSP might look like. We might have an import, and you see that gets copied over to the servlet that is being built by the container. The second line of the JSP is just a heading, an H1, and you see that gets copied over as a out.write. Out is an object that's available to us at all times. It's part of the template, so we don't have to say response.getWriter.println. We can just say out.write, and that's what the JSP does for us for basic HTML lines. So it just copies that line over inside of an out.write. This JSP scriptlet gets copied over just as regular Java code over here. And then this line gets copied over as a few different things. The start p tag gets copied over, the end p tag gets copied over, and then in the middle, the JSP expression, the contents of the JSP expression are just copied over into an out.print. Finally, we see there's a declaration down at the bottom. And remember, declarations get copied above the service method inside of the class. So although this was at the bottom of the file, it's a declaration, so it gets copied outside of the service. So counter is going to be initialized when this class is instantiated, and then it's going to be available to the service method, and the value is going to stick around. Also on naming, our file might have been called lowercase example.jsp. It would get translated to example_jsp.java. So there's a bunch of special variables that we have available to us. Request, response, out, session, page context, and application. And these are variables that are just, we don't have to declare these. The JSP has them automatically. The JSP servlet template has them automatically for us. Sessions are on by default. You can turn them off in your JSP with a declaration. Next, let's look at some common JSP mistakes. So here we've got two JSP tags. The first one is a scriptlet, and the second one's an expression. So the first one, it looks like it's trying to increment, but remember, scriptlets have to be valid Java code. And expressions, the second line, the expression is going to be an argument to out.print. So in this case, we've just put the semicolon in the wrong place. It should be after counter ++, and it should not be after counter. So here we are setting up, we're trying to tell the visitor what visitor number they are. So we see on the second line we have int counter equals 0, and on the first line we have counter ++. That might seem fine that we're declaring int counter, but these lines are just copied over one after the other. So on the first line, it's going to say counter ++. Well, if we haven't declared that already, that's going to be a problem. So these are out of order. And there's one more problem. So let's fix the order. Now the order is correct, but this is going to be a logic error. If we're trying to tell them that they're visitor number 2, 3, 4 on the second, third, and fourth request, that's actually not going to work the way we expect. Because we've used a scriptlet for the int counter line, this is going to happen for each service request. So each page request, it's going to set counter equal to 0. On the next line, it's going to increment it, and then it's going to say you are visitor number 1. Second request, same thing. Counter is going to be set to 0. It's going to be incremented, and they're going to be told they're visitor number 1, even though they might have been the second, third, fourth visitor. So as we saw before, we would use a declaration to move the declaration of int counter above the service method, or move the statement int counter equals 0 above the service method so it's part of the servlet class. Here's not really a mistake, but sort of an inefficient use of JSPs, or a sort of a misuse of JSPs. So this is fine that we have a multi-line scriptlet. In general, we won't want to write a lot of Java code inside of our JSPs, because after all, we're trying to get good at writing HTML. If we're trying to write a lot of HTML, what's the point of writing a lot of Java code inside of the HTML? So ideally, we wouldn't be writing a lot of Java code, but that's fine. But you should know that with our if statements, we can actually break this up. So notice that we're writing out.print count is over 5. So we're writing something that could potentially be a lot of HTML. Are we going to just write HTML inside of our Java again? No, what we would do is we would just separate it out so that the if statement is in its own scriptlet, this first part of it, and then put count is over 5 right by itself, just at the JSP, and then put the percent angle bracket percent around the ending curly brace, and that would be a much more efficient use. So try not to write a lot of HTML in your JSPs inside of Java code. We don't want to go back and forward 3 times from HTML to Java back to HTML, which is sort of what's happening here.